Martin Mitchell's my name, and our agenda, as I say, you should see slides in front of you now, hopefully. 4 things we're going to look at. The challenging context as our starting point. We'll talk about, I've called it potential approaches there. What it really is the different delivery mediums you could use. And then the bulk of this session will be looking at a couple of example cases, which I'll show you, that are drawn from, we produce some e-learning on this, and these are drawn from our bank of cases in our e-learning. So I'll show you a couple of those, and hopefully they will illustrate some of the issues I've been talking about. And then we'll very briefly wrap up with some additional resources, and then I won't dive off the call very quickly at the end. So if any of you have any questions and things, we can obviously talk once we're through this one. If any of you have any issues on the way through, as I say, your choices are the chat box or to unmute yourself and talk to me if you are brave enough to do that in front of all your colleagues, obviously, or your cohorts. So that's our agenda. Let's hopefully kick on. You should see in front of you now the 5 conduct rules. You know, and I know, that the SM&CR, the Senior Managers and Conduct regime, the Senior Managers and Certification regime, I'm sorry, introduces a set of conduct rules which are all about uplifting levels of personal accountability, ultimately. And for most of you on the call today, I presume most of you, your firms are coming into this regime at the current time, and you're in that kind of period where, strictly speaking, the regime started to apply to you from the 9th of December 2019, and you've got sort of a transitional period. It's a bit like Brexit, isn't it? I don't want to mention that word. Until the 9th of December 2020, when it's fully up and operational. And in this sort of transitional period, what you are supposed to do, what you're tasked with doing by the FCA, is to train virtually all of your staff in the conduct rules. And that's very much the context in which we are talking. And there you can see the key 5 individual conduct rules. Now, some of you are thinking, well, I know, Martin, there's actually 9 conduct rules. I know there's 5 conduct rules for individuals, and there's a further 4 for senior managers. And if you know that, you're absolutely right, and you're on the money, and that's brilliant. But our concentration is on those rules that affect all members of staff, virtually all members of staff, and training is required on these rules over the course of the current year. It ends 9th of December 2020, in which we're in the midst of it, and enjoying the challenges of coronavirus and a pandemic. But there are the 5. Now, when you look at those 5, I think you immediately see the issue. I've not sort of summarized those. Those are the 5 conduct rules. They're short, they're to the point, they're superficially simple, but actually interpreting those and getting the reality of those across to staff in the context of the kind of challenges they might face is where the challenge of conduct training comes in. So it's very much this whole superficial simplicity of these things and the inherent challenge of what does this mean in the context of individuals and in the context of what they're getting up to day to day in their job. Now, bear in mind those conduct rules. Number 1 in particular is going to be quite important for us later on when we get to the cases. I'm sure most of you are familiar with them anyway. What I've said on the next slide, so if I move on one slide, in terms of the challenge, is I'm saying, look, we do have this challenge of superficial simplicity of these things. These things also change with time, and you know and I know that right now we've got the Black Lives Matter thing. You know, in the recent past, we've had the whole Harvey Weinstein, Me Too movement and everything else, and that has sort of changed the dial for all of us. And that dial affects conduct as well as everything else within financial services as well as everywhere else. So we've got these superficially simple conduct rules. The actual legitimacy of them or the relevance of them does develop over time, and very recently we've had the government. We've had Matt Hancock talking about testing, haven't we, and the numbers being tested, and those numbers including the tests that were sent out. And when they started talking testing, they didn't make a big deal about that posted out thing. The reason they're now making a big deal about that posted out thing is because the UK Statistical Authority has had a bit of a go at them, saying, look, this is slightly misleading. So slight elements of misrepresentation there, perhaps. But conduct rules, superficially simple, the devil is in the detail, and these things move and develop. What has been acceptable in the past may no longer be acceptable. Black Lives Matter and all that, interesting examples of exactly that. Now, the training has to meet that challenge, and the way we as trainers, and I presume most of you have realized, to bring these things to life, to instill these in the minds of the staff that need to know about them, you need to make them real. You need to introduce some form of, sounds rather grand to put it like this, some form of case study. Some form of scenario is perhaps a more simplistic way of putting it. But I believe, myself and my other trainers believe, and I'm sure most of you realize, that without case studies and scenarios to actually instill what this means to people in their roles is quite difficult. So we advocate using cases, and I'll show you a couple of our cases, and I'll show you the way we think we've been quite creative in the way we've used them in a few minutes' time. So what have we got? We're saying use cases. In terms of using those cases, how can we use them? How can we present those to the staff that need training? Well, there are two basic ways of doing that. We could use e-learning. The challenge, additional challenge that e-learning presents is that with e-learning, you populate it with pre-written responses. Therefore, people are faced with what someone else has thought through and presented to them, and they don't have the flexibility to question and develop and get to the bottom of why they think one thing, and perhaps the case study is advocating something else. So e-learning has got this challenge of pre-written responses. I'll show you how you can be quite creative about those in a few minutes in the context of the cases. The second and more traditional way of doing things is by way of a live session, and that over the years has been what I've done a lot of, and I feel a little bit strange at the moment because I'm not doing any live face-to-face sessions, and I'm delivering them all virtually because of the pandemic, which is slightly weird for me, but I'm gradually getting used to it despite the occasional technical hiccup, which I apologize. But in terms of live sessions, be they face-to-face, and we'll get back there at some point, won't we, one hopes, or delivered virtually over WebEx or Zoom or Teams or whatever it may be, you have the ability to investigate nuance and look at the complexities and talk about precisely what the situation might mean and precisely what would mean you've got a conduct breach and where perhaps you haven't got a conduct breach. So live sessions give you the ability to be a bit more nuanced. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of cases, case one and case two. For both of them, I think I've pre-populated polls for them. So hopefully you can get involved and give me your views. All you got to do is say you think it's a conduct breach or you don't think it's a conduct breach, and I can share the results and we can get a sort of gut feel of what everybody thinks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the first of two case studies. So I'll show you the case study. You can read it. I'll help you along a bit with that, and then I'll launch a poll that lets you tell me whether you think it's a conduct rule breach or not. And both of these cases very much revolve around the first of the conduct rules, which is you shall behave with integrity. So there's case one. So what we've got, what you should be able to see, is a new CEO has come into the firm. It's a she, and she's making her mark by being significantly more disciplinarian than the previous incumbent. And you, in your wisdom, decide to doctor a picture of this new CEO by adding a Hitler moustache and share it with a selected few colleagues. And the question is that a breach of the conduct rules, yes or no? Now I'll try and launch my poll. Sorry, excuse me, I've got to get up there where I can see it. So you should see the poll now. So if you can start voting, please, that'd be fantastic. I'll give you a few moments to vote. It's lovely watching this because the line kind of moves around. It's very exciting for me, little things. Okay, so another 10 seconds. Okay, I think that'll do. So I'll end polling at that point and share the results so you can see what you've ended up with. So we've got, what, 72% that have said yes, they believe this is a breach of the conduct rules, and we've got 16 out of 58 who voted, 28% who said no. So we've got a bit of a mix there, and I'll show you what we've done. As I say, this case is one of a number. We've developed a whole host of these for our e-learning, and we use these in our e-learning partly as an assessment of whether people know the conduct rules and can deal with them appropriately. And I'll show you the responses we give people in the e-learning, and then I'll talk about whether the yeses have it or the noes have it. So if you bear with me a second, I'll stop sharing the results. So those results should have disappeared for you now. And you should see, hopefully, if I can get the next page. Yeah, you should see the responses there. Now, if yes is selected, we've got a certain response. If no is selected, we've got a certain response. Now, you'll see at the bottom there, it's fairly obvious, both are marked as correct. So I've got a lovely feeling at the moment where I can say to everybody, unless they didn't put a response to the poll down at all, that you're all right. Fantastic, perfect, 100%. But we're saying both of those things are right. Now I'll justify that in a moment. But you can see that on our e-learning, if someone selects yes, we give them a bit of feedback and we say, yes, this does place a large question mark over your integrity. Even if your intention was only to amuse, you've certainly chosen a tasteless way to do it. At worst, it could be considered extremely offensive. And our fundamental belief is that you've breached conduct rule 1, integrity. However, if you went for no, we're again saying you're right, but we are making the assumption that the individuals that voted no have assumed the intention was appropriately motivated, if you like. Assuming your intention was only to amuse, what you've done may be construed as relatively harmless. However, the way you've done it is tasteless and could be considered offensive, poor judgment, and some would view it as an integrity issue. So some might view it as a problem. The aim of those two bits of feedback are obviously to bring about the same learning point, that you know what's significant here. The reason why we've put them both down as correct on the e-learning is because this is inspired by a real case. Now, some of you will have come across the real case perhaps, but the real case happened in Australia. It related to BP, the oil company, and what happened is a new disciplinarian boss came in. One of the members of staff doctored a picture with a military uniform. It wasn't quite the Hitler moustache. And that individual was sacked by BP because of what they'd done. Obviously, they felt integrity was in doubt there, not they have to apply the FCA's SM&CR rules. And then the individual took their case to a tribunal, and the tribunal reinstated the individual, or force BP to reinstate the individual in their job. And the rationale was for that was because what he was trying to do was actually to motivate staff. So the intention was good. The intention may have been somewhat tasteless, but the intention was sound, and it revolved around this amusement thing. And that's why amusement is mentioned in those responses there. So that's inspired by a real case. It's very much a non-financial misconduct issue, which is a nice generic case to talk to people about. And I hope you found that useful. At least you all got it right anyway. So that's example case 1. Now I've done another one, example case 2, obviously. So here we are, example case 2, same kind of game. So example case 2, is it a breach? Is it not? This one is all about expenses. So we've got the firm's policy on expenses is to allow up to £30 to be incurred on evening meals whilst away. You're away, you meet a friend for supper, your friend pays, but you grab the receipt and you submit it as part of your expenses. It's less than £30 that you're claiming, and you consider that's an allowance for the inconvenience of being away from home. Okay. So have you breached? Have you not? Again, I should be able to find the poll, hopefully. So launch polling. So you should see the poll now, I hope. Be able to, yeah, so you're all voting, that's great. All right, another couple of seconds. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, I'll end polling and share the results at that stage. So you should be able to see that 88% of you have said yes, and only 12% of you have said no. Now, I think the 88% of you, I think you're absolutely sound. I think that's good. So I'll show you the responses again. So if we move on to the responses, so you should see there, get that sharing out the way. So you should see there that in terms of the responses, we've got a tick next to the yes, we've got a cross next to the no. So we believe that yes is the right response to this one, no is the wrong response. We believe this is a conduct breach. Why do we believe this is a conduct breach? Because this is fraud. This is a fraudulent expense claim. It doesn't matter about the justification in the individual's head that this is an entitlement for being away. And I can tell you, I've been around for quite a long time, as you can tell by my grey beard and lack of hair up top, but I've seen exactly this kind of thing go on regularly over the long term in my career history, where people believe there is an entitlement there, and frankly it doesn't matter whether you spent the money or not, you can claim for the entitlement. I think times have changed, and that is not acceptable anymore, and that is a categoric conduct breach, I believe. So I think this one is absolutely clear cut. So I believe 88% of you were right. The other 12%, you were just having fun with me. I know that. I know you really knew what was right and you were just having a bit of a lark. Now, please be confident that these results are anonymous. So I don't know who said yes and who said no. So it doesn't matter which way you voted. I hope those cases illustrate how, number one, with e-learning, you can be quite creative with them, but you can get even more from them, I think, if you can discuss them and get the group to discuss and investigate the nuance. And you could only do that in live events, be they face-to-face or virtual. Now, you'd be pleased to hear that at the CCL Academy, we do all of that. Yeah, we do the e-learning, we do the virtual, we do the face-to-face. But you don't have to use us. It'd be lovely if you chose to do so. You might choose to do it yourself, but I've got to be aware that it's not only training events where you can teach people things about conduct rules. And my final slide here is about that. It's pointing out that there are other resources available to you. Now, I've got 3 on the slide that you can see there. I've got, first of all, the CISI's Integrity Matters. Now, I don't know how many of you are members of the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments, but some of you will probably be exactly that, or you'll certainly have people in your firm that are. And you might be aware, you might not be aware, that they've been publishing something they call Integrity Matters for quite some time, well before the introduction of the conduct rules to the wider SM&CR group. And they've got a whole stack of these things that are available to members, and some of them available to non-members, well worth investigating and quite nice to share, nice to discuss, lots of nuance, lots of depth in those things, and freely available. Certainly if you're paying a membership fee, those are pretty easy to get hold of. We at the CCL Academy also publish something which is free. And that's the second point there, which is concerning conduct. So we publish a newsletter every 3 months. We call it Concerning Conduct. It's slightly inspired by Integrity Matters at the CISI, and a nod to them for that. And what we do is we pick up on stories in the press that revolve around conduct issues, most of them in financial services, but sometimes outside of that, and highlight the kind of issues there in a short paragraph or 2 that enable you to use those things and think about the impact that might have on you. So that's freely available. You can subscribe for that by contacting me or my colleagues. I'll show you at the end of this. And thirdly, and more importantly, all of your firms face kind of conduct concerns or conduct worries or potential conduct issues all of the time, and you're considering those things. It is absolutely vital that you begin to build up a bank of these situations and in some way educate each other with those things. So sharing internal issues. Now, many of these things need to be escalated. Certainly conduct breaches need to end up in a conduct breach register. But that kind of source is really very, very powerful and very much related to the business you're in, clearly, because these are things that have arisen within your business. So those are important resources that you should be able to utilize. I hope that makes sense. The next slide talks about any questions. If any of you want to unmute and say something now, feel free to do so. What I've got is 2 other slides on the pack. For completion, I've got the conduct rules for senior managers. So there's the other 4 conduct rules that apply to senior managers. You, my audience, probably know that. And I've got a sort of thank you slide there telling you about some of the things that we do and giving you some details of contact to my business development colleagues, George Bartlett in particular. And we have obviously e-learning online type modules. We also, as I've said to you, do virtual and face-to-face events. And we also provide train the trainer to our clients if that's something they're interested in. So that's about us. Those of you that want a copy of the slides, if you just send me an email afterwards, I can send out a copy of the slides to you, and that would be great, no problem at all. And I'd be very happy to do that. But if any of you have any questions, feel free to ask away. If you don't want to ask anything and you've had enough, you're free to go if you want to.